Welcome to Taking Stock. I'm Amanda Lang. Coming up on the show, a special look at cities in Canada, including what are the top concerns for urban centres and how can accountability and responsibility be better matched, plus a wish list for building better cities. That's all ahead. First, what makes one city great and another so-so? Here's what you need to know. The list of what makes a city great is subjective, but tends to include quality of life issues like affordability, crime levels and homelessness, commute times and access to health care. With those in mind, Edmonton has been ranked tops in Canada, followed by Calgary, Ottawa, Vancouver and Mississauga. A ranking that considers pollution level, commute times, and cost of living might favor smaller urban centres. But on a global ranking of cities by Oxford Economics, cities are weighted on factors that include its economic vitality, the human capital available for work, the quality of life there, the environment, and the governance. On that list, only 5 Canadian cities make the top 100, with Toronto ranking at number 20. Also on the list, Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal, and Ottawa. With 44% of Canadians saying housing affordability is their top concern, that puts it high on the list of problems for cities to solve. Vancouver ranks top as the least affordable city based on percentage of income needed for a mortgage payment at 124.6 for the non-condo market and an average annual salary requirement of $341,000. Toronto is also unaffordable, with mortgage payments eating up 80% of incomes in the non-condo market and an annual income of more than $275,000 required to buy the average home. And infrastructure is a top quality of life issue. The infrastructure gap for just transportation and water is pegged at more than $224 billion in Canada. Building great cities depends a lot on the fabric of those places, on infrastructure and housing, and on public spaces that work. Mary Rowe is president and CEO of the Canadian Urban Institute. Mary, thanks for being with us.
No, my pleasure. Nice to see you.
It feels like for cities, and maybe this is just the reality of a fiscal situation, but some of our infrastructure issues take a backseat, that we sort of forget that this is the underpinning of our lives and our economies. What's your recommendation for keeping that top of mind for urban centers?
Well, nobody needs to really be told it anymore, because you just walk out your door and you can see it. And as you say, the city and places across the country are experiencing particular kinds of strains because we're aging, just like you and I are, Amanda, so are our communities. And so part of it is trying to figure out how we're going to invest in keeping, like we have to keep our house maintained, we have to keep our bodies maintained, we need to keep all the built environment around us maintained in infrastructure and investing. The important thing, though, is that investing in these different kinds of infrastructures, of which there are many, many, many kinds, it creates jobs. It creates wealth, it creates economic opportunity, and it's good for the climate and it's good for the economy. It's kind of a win-win to invest in the built environment.
There are different ways we could see it happening. Some of them, of course, a new road. We know there's a lot of appeal to that. You can actually point to kind of quick outcomes and returns on that. Less sexy, maybe, replacing aging water infrastructure, but super important, less visible. It feels like we're investing in something that already exists. If you were to stack or rank the places you want to see this stuff happen, how much of it is below that waterline, literally invisible to most of us?
You're like asking to tell me your favorite child. It's all of it has to be focused on at the same time. The interesting thing, though, is communities have different sets of challenges. So in some communities, as we're seeing across the country, the particular pressures that wildfires are putting on communities means that you need to invest differently in those parts of the country that have that kind of challenge. Maybe we have other parts where traffic and investments in transit are the priority. So it has to be done on a place-based place priority basis. And that's one of the challenges with funding infrastructure. It's not one size fits all ever. But what you need is a blended approach, and you need a collaborative approach between the federal government, the provincial government, and local governments, and also increasingly the private sector. And you're right, there's a lot that's invisible. It's not just the stuff we see, but there are fabulous people working across the country. They're called asset managers. They run evaluations and risk management exercises all the time. And so we need to be really listening to the expertise that tell us, in this particular community, you better start with that. Right. And with that community, you better start with this.
On that same front, it can often feel to those of us outside of the circle of knowledge that there's kind of the right hand not knowing what the left is doing. Is there enough planning and efficiencies being brought to, you think of kind of urban infrastructure improvements, and it often feels like nobody realized they were ripping up every north-south street in Toronto for 3 months. Are there people who are planning this and we just don't know about it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the kind of typical thing that people complain about. And, I always want to remind people, if you're complaining about the traffic, think about the alternative. If you have a city that doesn't have much going on, then you don't have a lot of traffic and you don't have the kind of competition that we see in our denser urban environments across the country between infrastructure investment and construction and new buildings and all that kind of thing. I think the better way to say this is that we need better alignment. We need orders of government and departments within municipalities and with the province and feds to have line of sight into what each is doing. And I think the dilemma we have now, to be frank, is that we're still dealing with a post-COVID environment where lots of projects were shelved because they had to be, and then suddenly there's a surfeit of them, as you and I can see on streets everywhere, and you're left with, why the heck are they replacing that sidewalk when they're also trying to build a new building there? It's not always going to be like that, and I think we should all kind of adjust our expectation here. Cities are extraordinarily complex. Investing in infrastructure, really, really expensive and complex, needs a lot of coordination. Like any building site, imagine you're trying to build just a building. Then if you're trying to do 6 buildings and you're trying to also put new water lines in and all that stuff. So I think the governments are getting better at this. They're getting better because they co-fund now. And so the idea is that you create these pro formas that show what the sequencing is. Could we do a better job at that? Absolutely. But let's just remember that a bustling, creative city is going to have lots of stuff going on. And just consider the alternative. Nothing going on.
So good to have you. Appreciate your time.
Good to see you.
Mary Rowe is president and CEO of the Canadian Urban Institute. Coming up, from crime rates to traffic, our lives are made better or worse by how a city functions. Stay with us. Welcome back. The mayors of Canada's cities have responsibility for everything from the police to clean water and your morning commute, juggling it all on budgets that can't go into deficit. Maryann Meade Ward is the mayor of Burlington and is chair of Ontario's Big City Mayors. Thanks for being with us.
Great to be here.
So I did want to start with just the sheer complexity of managing all of those different moving parts of a city. If you have to prioritize it from the mayor's office, how do you do that? How do you decide what should be at the top of the agenda for a city?
Well, certainly public safety always comes first. So whatever is going to potentially impact our community in a negative way from a health or safety standpoint, we prioritize that. But often that means with limited dollars that things that should be done get deferred or delayed. And, we really need a new deal for cities among the federal and provincial government and municipalities, because we have changed in our complexity in 100 years, but the funding model for cities, property tax based primarily, and government handouts when they choose to give us money, has not been updated in 100 years. And yet the complexity of issues that we face and we're on the front lines of has dramatically increased even in the last decade, I would say. And we really saw that during COVID, that we are providing public health, by law enforcement, communications messaging and support for our communities, and in some cases, financial supports. So we do it all. We're the closest level of government to the people. We know what they need, and we can be good partners in the Federation, but we need a new deal. We can't continue to ask the property tax base to cover costs that were never intended to be funded through this model.
And so there's a lot in there, of course, Mayor, but let's start with law and order, which a lot of Canadians are focused on right now. It feels as though we are not in a great place, certainly in Canada's big cities. And obviously police, funding of police is a big part of that. But of course, the court system is another piece of it, whether people can get bail and how quickly and all that. That is not, of course, something that is in the control of the municipal government. How do these things fit together? What do you do when parts of it that make people arguably less safe are just beyond your purview?
We use our voice and we speak with one voice. And that's really the beauty of Ontario Big City Mayors Caucus. Together, we represent 70% of Ontario's population. But nationwide, we're 30%. We're 1 in 3 residents is represented by members of our caucus. And, we have a big megaphone, and we have built relationships with people at the federal and provincial governments to say, you need to consult with us and listen to us when we speak. And they are doing that. We certainly have, definitely an in terms of communicating on behalf of our residents. We've spoken up about auto theft, and the government responded. We've spoken up about bail reform, and now there's action that's being taken. We've spoken up about homelessness, mental health, addictions. That is starting to get some attention and get some funding from other levels of government. And, when you look at policing, for example, one of the biggest challenges facing municipalities is dramatically escalating police budgets. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you right here in Halton, but it's not unique across the country or among our members, over a 14% increase in policing. And a lot of that is mental health calls, almost 80%. And so we have said to the government, if you don't address some of the upstream social issues that are leading to mental health, addictions, homelessness, intimate partner violence, this is what's going to continue to happen. And it costs far more money to address these issues after the fact than to be proactive and help people before they slide into that situation. So when they're on these calls, of course, there are so many other calls coming in. And so we're continually having to staff up to deal with the complexity of issues that our police are facing as well.
So in terms of some of those issues, housing, of course, and affordability of housing is a major one that affects how most people feel about their city and their life. You mentioned homelessness. That's one piece of it. Affordable housing is a piece of it, and housing affordability, which is different. We've seen this push towards, for instance, changing development fees and trying to fast track the regulatory process, which could be seen as sort of bigfooting onto municipalities' rights to control how things are developed. Do you come at it from that point of view, that you don't think that the province should overstep in trying to solve these problems?
Yeah, I mean, we know our business, and I think at times they will even acknowledge, they have acknowledged that we know our business best and see us as partners and advisors before they set out policy. But the narrative has really changed, and I think it's due to that ongoing conversation and using our megaphone. Once upon a time, the narrative was that the only thing standing between a young couple or newcomers and a brand new house is development fees from municipalities and the time it takes to get a permit. And we now know, of course, that there are supply chain issues, there's interest rates, there's the investor market disappearing, inflationary pressures, all of which has cooled the housing market, the private sector market, and now, of course, tariffs. Mm-hmm. So the flip side of that is the recognition, finally, that development charges pay for things that communities need. Things like water and sewer to hook up your new house to, very important, roads, but also transit, community centers, parks. These are the things that are being required to be funded through development charges in the absence of this new deal that I talked about. They're not nothing. And these things need to be paid for somehow if there's an interest in cutting development charges. And that message is getting through. So I was with 2,000 elected officials, staff from the municipal sector at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Conference in Ottawa just a few days ago. Prime Minister Carney spoke to that audience. He mentioned cutting development charges in half, but he said the very important words, "But we will keep you whole." He acknowledged development charges right now are a tool to pay for things. And if that tool, if there's a desire to change that tool, we need another source of funding. And we come back to the New Deal. For cities, that is absolutely essential, that municipalities at the Ontario level and the federal level have been asking for several years now.
Gotta leave it there. Great to have you with us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Maryann Meade Ward is the Mayor of Burlington and Chair of Ontario's Big City Mayors. Coming up, the former Mayor of Toronto on what makes a city work. Would cities work better if people were more engaged in municipal politics? Given it's important in our lives, it's in some ways the most opaque level of government. John Tory is the former mayor of Toronto. Thanks for being with us.
Pleasure, Amanda.
I want your perspective on that first. It feels to me as though people pay the least attention to the city level, even though it is the one that affects our lives the most directly. Would you agree with that premise, first of all?
Well, I would say except when they need something. The kinds of things they're more likely to interface with government about is not so much their passport or not so much even something to do with the healthcare system, but did their trash get picked up? Did the police come? Does the fire department come? Does the transit system work? And so in that sense, I think people are very engaged with government, with that government, the local level of government, but not engaged in the context of policymaking or even where that government fits among the three, because that's a real problem where there just isn't the coordination and support for cities that there might be from the other governments.
Which is, of course, one of the things that makes these systems so interesting is the taxation difference and then the impact. And I guess you're right. We engage when we complain. But in terms of kind of actually having a say in how we're policed, how our garbage is picked up, we kind of wait till it's a problem. Let's go back to this kind of the sort of accountability, which is tied to taxation. Do cities have the powers to generate revenue that they should have that would actually force us to actually pay more attention to what's happening?
Well, I mean, there's two ways to do this. I mean, nothing is free. And if you're going to expect, as I believe you should, cities as the closest to the people to deliver services, because I think as we found in spades during the pandemic, the cities can most effectively deliver services directly to people. If you're going to do that, then you have to make sure they have the money to do it. And the money can come only in two ways. One is through taxation. And I think that property taxes and commercial taxes, which is really all cities can do, most cities, that's not good enough anymore. So you need to have either another tax vehicle or you need to have a fairer share of the revenue taken in by the other governments who have sources of taxation that grow with the economy, like the income tax, the corporate tax, or the sales tax.
Do you see any potential movement on that? I mean, that would involve another government giving up some of its own taxing power. So that would be, I guess, a tall order in some ways.
Well, I think it has to change because what you're seeing happen in this city, in this country, is more and more being asked of cities, I think quite properly, because they are the best at delivering services to people. But at the same time, you get these envelopes with the letters in them saying, here's another thing we want you to look after, but there's no check. And I think that none of these things are free. So I'm not so sure it's as much them giving up a share of their revenue as it is to say, if we're going to transfer responsibility to you, then we have to be fair and say that we transfer the money that goes with it. And I just think that's going to provide for a better functioning country, whether it's in housing or in transit or public safety, all the things people really care about these days.
Well, let's talk about that, because you ran the biggest, most complicated city in this country. In terms of what people do care about, where do you think, what's the priority that you would say should be in place for cities in terms of getting it right so that people enjoy living there?
Well, I think they have to have a healthy overall sort of existence, a quality of life that's healthy. I know that sounds like a kind of a trite phrase, but I think that kind of quality of life attracts investment, and investment creates jobs, and people need jobs. So, I mean, first and foremost, people need to have a job. And I think what follows from that is they need to have a place to live, hopefully affordable. They need to have a way to get around, which is the transit system. They need to feel safe, which is public safety. And I think those are the priorities of people. But the problem at the moment is municipalities are being asked to do more and more and more. And they're turning to tools like development charges, which are charges levied on people who build housing, to raise the money, which then in turn only makes housing more expensive. So that's why the solution has to rest somewhere else, other than just saying to municipalities, good luck delivering these services, making for safe, prosperous, investment-friendly communities with jobs, but say you're doing it on your own.
It's such a good point in terms of, promises being made. We'll make it less expensive to develop. But some of those charges are really important to supporting the infrastructure that goes to supporting those new communities. Similarly, people talk about law and order. Are we funding the apparatus of law and order properly, and where should that reside? Do you think other levels of government should take more accountability, or would that just result in an overstep into kind of city authority?
Well, this is part of the problem. You hit the nail right on the head. When you have the federal government even talking about, as happened when I was mayor, it's still happening today, getting involved in housing, you get sort of the braying and crying from provinces across the country saying, well, you can't, give money directly to cities. That's in our area of jurisdiction. I don't think that people care about jurisdiction or the Constitution. They care about getting housing built and some affordable housing being a part of that. And so I think in the end, people would welcome any government being part of this. Really what should happen, and it doesn't, is that all three governments should sit down together and have what I've always called a contract that says, well, fine, here's what somebody's going to do. You pick the level of government that delivers, and then we'll all three find a way to pay for it. We did it with a $40 billion transit plan that's happening in Toronto right now between Prime Minister Trudeau at the time, Premier Ford, and me. And we sorted that out. We just sorted out what's being built and how it's going to be paid for, and we all shared it. But there's far too little of that. And in fact, there's instances on housing where there are actually competing programs or programs that don't coordinate with each other that I think in a way stand in the way of all the money we have available being put to good use building housing, and in particular affordable housing.
I want to ask you, you did run the city of Toronto successfully as a mayor. If there's one thing you wish you'd been able to achieve, what would you say it is?
It probably would be what they call a new deal as between all three levels of government, so that you could actually put aside all this constitutional mumbo jumbo and say, look, we're going to make it work in terms of housing, transit, public safety, and so on. And we're going to cooperate together on who does what and on how it gets paid for. And that all three governments recognize they have a responsibility if you want to have healthy cities, which are, after all, where 80% of Canadians live, that you're going to have that kind of a sharing and maybe put aside the precise language of the Constitution to get stuff done.
So good to have you. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Amanda.
John Tory is the former mayor of Toronto. Time for the takeaway and the secret sauce of great cities. When it comes to urban centers that really thrive, it's safe to say they're as different as can be. There's simply no comparing London's historical glamour to New York's economic power. But what great cities do share is the pulse that drives them. And as tempting as it might be to say that is industry, that's also a short-sighted way of describing a thriving center. Of course, a healthy economy is the foundation of every great urban center so that people can work, but also because businesses on the top of their game are also innovating constantly. So the places they occupy become hotbeds of ideas and attract the kind of people who have them and who benefit from them. But to get good businesses to a city requires some really mundane things. That includes homes their employees can afford, schools their children can attend, a safe environment is table stakes, and an affordable housing market can be a game changer. Then there are the shared mundane things like decent roads and transit systems so the daily commute isn't a nightmare. Good hospitals and other emergency services are the kinds of things that fall under the heading of we don't consider them at all until they're the most important thing in the world. Smart cities know that keeping all of the underpinning of life humming will pay off. The trouble is that some of that investment isn't particularly easy to sell, especially those that are long-term and not very visible. But making it happen is the role of city governments and also their provincial leaders. It can be hard to see the direct line between rising crime in a city and a business decision not to invest, but the line is there, and it's a costly one when cities take their eye off the prize. My takeaway? Keeping a city in good shape takes effort, but keeping it a place attractive to business is one of the ways to make sure it's attractive to everyone else. That's Taking Stock for this week. I'm Amanda Lang. Thanks for being with us.